The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Orin.
What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of deep open-minded conversation. I'm the one they call Shane, and today for you guys, I have something that I haven't talked about on the show in a really, really long time, and it's the flat Earth, globe Earth debate. But today's guest comes at it from an unbiased opinion, trying to do his own research to prove it either way. And unlike a lot of people doing this research, he isn't necessarily guided by either trying to prove flat Earth or globe Earth, but actually find the truth in the middle, which is a breath of fresh air as far as this kind of research goes. But before we get into the show today, just some quick news and updates. One of which is that I'm going to be switching the hosting platform for the show. So that is going to be getting switched over to Spreaker instead of Red Circle. So if anybody notices any weird updates or any information getting scattered or anything as far as the show descriptions and everything goes, that is why. If you have to research the show in order to get new episodes, that again is another reason why. So make sure you guys are observant of that. On the next episode, make sure it's updating for you guys, or if it updates onto something else, you guys are resetting everything to auto download or whatever you guys have set for it. So just a quick heads up. And on the other side of it, there's going to be some new format changes coming for the show. As far as these intros and everything, they're going to get a lot shorter so we can hop right into the information. And the second piece of news and updates is that I'm going to be doing some structural changes to the show. So you guys will notice that the beginning of the show will be a lot shorter before we get into the conversation. Make it so we can hop in with you guys, because I'm sure you guys don't want to listen to all the bullshit in the beginning, but hopefully you guys will at least stay around for the updates and everything if I make the beginning a lot shorter for you guys. And the third piece of news and updates, something really, really quick. The next event that I got to make sure I start promoting, because I am going to be vending and speaking at it, is Cryptid Halloween 3. That is going to be a Cryptid festival and Halloween craft show, and that'll be happening in West Virginia on Saturday, October 26th. From 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. Orin and I are going to be emceeing and speaking in that event, and there will also be Rick from IKNOWSQUATCH, and there's also going to be Kevin from Where the Weird Ones Are. So make sure you guys are staying up to date on that if you guys are interested in coming out. It is free admission, so you guys can have a little bit less money to spend on admission and be able to get in and be able to hang out and check out all the awesome vendors. There is going to be more information on that down in the show description, so if anybody's interested in coming to that, make sure you guys go down there and get that information, and you guys mark your calendars, of course. And just a quick message before we get into the show. This podcast has a strong focus on community engagement, so I encourage all listeners to share their own experiences and research on the show. So if anybody would like to share an encounter, you guys can email me at ommencounterreports@outlook.com. And if anybody is interested in being a guest on the show, you guys can email me at inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com. And every single thing that I mentioned is all available in the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show, Will Duffy from The Final Experiment. How's it going today, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I know we had some bounce back and forth with emails. I think, were you one of the people that hit me up to come on the show, or did I message you? It was so long ago, I don't even remember at this point.
Yeah, you reached out to me.
Okay, so it was me reaching out to you then. Okay, so before we get rolling into everything, man, I always like to kind of give a little bit of a groundwork for who somebody is, what they do. So before we get into the final experiment itself, why don't you let people know a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So again, my name is Will Duffy. I currently pastor a small church outside of Denver, Colorado. And about 3 years ago, I was introduced into the world of flat Earth and the whole flat Earth versus globe debate. And it intrigued me. It was interesting. It wasn't something that I wanted to just set aside and ignore. I like to understand people, understand what they think, what they believe, why they believe it. And so it wasn't very long, and I found myself deep in the flat Earth rabbit hole. And that is what eventually gave me the idea for the final experiment.
And the final experiment, where exactly do you get that name from? Where's like the reference to?
I just came up with it one day. So I was driving either to work or from work. That's where I got my deep thinking in back then, and just came up with the name and thought it was a good one. So I used it. That's it.
And then as far as like your page and everything goes, do you specifically just cover flat Earth, or would you cover like an array of different topics? What's kind of your bread and butter, man?
Yeah, so with the flat Earth globe debate, the final experiment was designed by me to provide some finality to the debate. That's kind of my goal. So I don't look at myself as a debunker or anything like that. I honestly don't know if I'll continue this once we're done with the final experiment. So everything final experiment related, including our website, thefinalexperiment.com with dashes, the-final-experiment.com, and our YouTube channel, The Final Experiment, is solely for the experiment itself.
And then as far as like the stuff that actually started getting to you, where you started realizing that, things may not exactly be as they seem, what kind of started laying the groundwork for you to kind of get you onto the other side of the spectrum as far as like not going along with the mainstream narrative?
Yeah, so when I first heard about Flat Earth, it sounded like, I thought it was a joke and maybe people joked around about being Flat Earth. But then I found out I had a friend who was Flat Earth and quickly found out she was very serious about it. And so I asked her some questions, and I thought I would be able to quickly change her mind. What I found out was I didn't understand the globe model that I held to very much at all, and that she understood the globe model better than I did, and she had answers for the things I was bringing up. The big turning point for me was a guy online stated that there were duplicated clouds on an image of Earth on NASA's website. And when people make claims, I usually don't believe them. It's like, okay, great, there's a claim. Now let's back it up with evidence. And he actually gave the link to NASA's website. It wasn't a fake website or anything like that. And sure enough, there were duplicated clouds on that picture. And I thought that that was a picture of Earth from space on NASA's website. And I was like, okay, there's something here. I need to get to the bottom of it. And that's kind of what really set me off.
Man, you start diving into the NASA stuff, and there's so much weird stuff. Like, one of the main things that I feel like kind of got me moving along the path where I got into podcasting and stuff eventually was that I'd sit and I'd watch the NASA live feeds all the time. And there was just so much weirdness with it, where you'd catch constant glitches. They do this thing all the time where you'd catch that they would repeat something because you'd notice like a certain shooting star or something that would go by, or just something moving off in the distance. And then you'd notice that would happen like multiple times within a couple minute period. And they would also do this thing constantly where as soon as there was like a bright light or something weird that started happening with the camera, they'd instantly cut the feed. So it's like no matter what side of the spectrum you're on as far as like flat Earth or your globe Earth, there's always that weird stuff going on with NASA, and there's no questions about it. So it's like at a certain point, man, it's kind of like we all need to gang up on NASA and figure out what's actually going on with all this stuff. Because, I mean, how many times have people actually found the perfect images where they supposedly have pictures of the surface of Mars? And when they actually show a duplicate picture of it, it's like somewhere in the middle of like a desert somewhere. And they'll have like the exact mountainscape, everything, and it'll just have like a red tint over it. So it's like almost undeniable if you actually pay attention that NASA spends a lot of time conducting all of this weird stuff that they seem like they're trying to hide something big. And I mean, one of the even better ones that I forgot to mention was they're doing some like tour or something of the NASA's of Cape Canaveral, I believe it was, wherever they do like the operating rooms and everything. And as they were like moving through and panning through, they had people that were supposedly on the space station, except there was like a blue screen behind them and you could see the wires. So it's like, even with all that stuff, man, it's like you're seeing all these people in space, they're supposedly floating, but like their hair is perfectly hairsprayed up. It has no movement to it. But so no matter what, man, I don't think that they're actually in space conducting any of this stuff that they supposedly are saying is actually coming from space.
Yeah, I guess that's the big debate, right?
Dude, and I mean, even diving into it too, I want to hear kind of like some of your ideas on like why you think the Earth itself is flat, because I know that a lot of people kind of use that point of reference where they say like stuff off in the distance with the horizon, and it seems like a lot of people when they try to like state that stuff, you kind of hear like a lot of like repeating information. So sometimes it's kind of like hard to kind of dissect where exactly everything's coming from. But at least for like you yourself, assuming that you are running the final experiment, you assumably have done some of these experiments yourself. So what have kind of been like your results for this kind of stuff?
Well, I should give you a little backstory. So after I dove into this and started looking at everything, I realized that there didn't seem to be anything that would be convincing to both sides, meaning the Globers were very steadfast in their belief, and anything that the flat earthers would present them, they wouldn't really accept it, and vice versa. The flat earthers seem very steadfast in their what they believe, and anything that the globe side brings, they don't really accept it. So the reason I came up with the final experiment is after watching just dozens of hours of content, I saw something which was agreement from both sides, which was Antarctica. And so the globe side says that Antarctica is this island continent at the bottom of the ball. Flat earthers say it's an ice ring, an ice wall that encompasses all of the other continents. And so those are very different. Those are wildly different in size, in scope. And then the thing that really caught my attention was this whole thing about the sun. So the globe side was saying that there's a 24-hour sun in Antarctica, and the flat earth side was saying, no, there's not. And then the globe side would say, like, a 24-hour sun would prove the globe. And then the flat earth side would say, yes, a 24-hour sun would prove the globe, but there isn't one. And I was like, okay, here's something we could do where both sides are in agreement. Both sides agree a 24-hour sun would prove the globe, and a lack of a 24-hour sun would actually falsify the globe and prove flat earth. And so I wanted this for myself and for everybody else, and I wanted to get both sides involved, invite both sides. I'm actually paying for both sides so that we can have something that's definitive to kind of make everybody happy. But I will tell you, after my deep dive into everything, I was never fully convinced that the Earth is flat. So this for me is kind of like the final thing that I'm doing for myself as well.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back. So let's hop right in. See, that's kind of where I'm at with the whole thing, is that there's so many different pieces of evidence that could potentially swing multiple different ways that I've never fully developed into any specific camp. The only thing that I can definitely feel like I can say is that there is some type of like circular point to it, that it's either a globe or it's like a round surface. But of course there's like the weird parts, like they say that, you know, obviously if the world rotates as we think it does, that you wouldn't be able to see the moon and the sun at the same time, but it seems like you can always see the moon and the sun at the same time. And I've never been able to quite figure out, people say it's like reflections or something into like the atmosphere, but I've always found that kind of weird myself. But no matter, regardless of which model you possibly think that it might be, I definitely think that it isn't the shape that they're telling us it is, whether it's a bigger globe, which could possibly make sense, and it would completely accompany the whole idea of there being these other land masses that exist at the top of the planet / bottom of the planet. But I definitely think that there is more places and continents than what they give off to. And again, no matter which model you kind of follow, I don't remember the guy's name offhand, but I'm going to kick myself in the ass for not remembering later. But the guy that supposedly flew over Antarctica, and he was claiming that there was these like land masses in the middle where there was like forests and there was all these different areas in it. So, I mean, no matter which model you look at, there's definitely something weird to that continent, and specifically the fact that nobody's allowed to go to it unless you have government documentation saying that you're allowed to go to it. And even so, it's like if you get tours of it, they kind of keep you around the perimeter of it, and they don't get you anywhere near the center of it, which, again, could it be that it's a lot bigger than they think it is, or is there eventually a point where you hit an ice wall or something else at the end of it?
Yeah, Antarctica is definitely an enigma. It's very mysterious, but I think that's cool. There are, to my knowledge, places in Antarctica that have never been fully explored, and that's exciting to me, right? The idea of finding something new, discovering something new, is, I think, exciting to everyone. So that's not going to be the main thrust behind the final experiment. The main thrust behind the final experiment is the sun and what the sun does in Antarctica. But hey, maybe this will open up a door to finding new things as well.
So if you guys are trying to run the experiment as far as the sun in Antarctica, what's kind of like your guys' method that you guys are going to use to try to prove or disprove this?
Yeah, well, it's pretty cut and dry. So on the globe model, the sun should never set, meaning while we're in Antarctica, the sun will just be doing circles like this up in the sky and it'll never set. On the flat Earth model, it would set because we would be south. We're flying south of South America from the tip of Chile, and the sun will have to cover the entire flat Earth, including being over Australia, which is on the opposite other side. And so it would never be visible for 24 hours. So it's actually a pretty simple experiment to see whether or not the sun stays in the sky and does circles above our head, or if it rises and sets each day.
And assumably, as you mentioned kind of in the beginning, I assume that you kind of come into this from somewhat of like a biblical perspective where you kind of dive into the Bible itself as some validity as to the actual flat Earth globe model.
A little bit. I have an interesting take, which is that I don't think the Bible was necessarily written to tell us everything about this world that we live in. I think God created the world to be discovered and explored and researched. That's kind of what makes living here on Earth so exciting, is just constantly learning about our world that we live in and learning new things.
See, I've gotten into this whole weird idea kind of based on that a little bit too. It kind of gets into somewhat of like the whole simulation theory idea. But I've often wondered if originally when people were writing about the firmament and this like smaller area of Earth, if that was all that the landmass was needed at the time. And if God himself is the creator, he assumably wants people to explore, so he would keep expanding this area. So I've often wondered if it's a matter of, as we explore areas, it expands, and maybe at one point it could have been a complete flat, round, or not even round, but like a square surface. And as it expanded, maybe it eventually became a bigger globe model to the point where it's so big that we kind of almost feel like we're completely flat on potentially on a side of this thing. Or on the other side of it, if it's a matter of, one, it was a flat Earth at one point and eventually it developed into a globe Earth. But, I mean, I feel like there's still a lot of weirdness as far as like the rendering kind of idea goes, that, you know, when we're talking about other bodies in space, it seems like you can almost kind of look at it like the video game perspective, that you can see something across the map, but it doesn't actually fully render until you've actually been into that specific place. So some of these places that we're looking at from a distance, it may be kind of a weird concept, but maybe they're not actually there until somebody has actually physically been there, and there's something that exists farther off in this model that's been created for like basically humans to be center point on. And as we keep expanding out, the model itself keeps expanding out, because it's a matter also of growth, because it seems like humans have this internal need to be able to explore and expand. And if they get stuck in the same area, same mundane thing all the time, it doesn't seem like it's mentally healthy for people. So assumably if there was a creator, there's a God, he would want to keep expanding that area in order to be able to keep it so people can keep growing and also keep like expanding their minds. And whether that's, again, going from like one surface to another surface, or if all of these surfaces are all in one place and these places we're looking at as Mars and all that are all within the same flat surface, I mean, I guess it's a matter of debate. And it seems like the only people that have access to be able to go up high enough to be able to actually definitely tell you a specific model, it's all government controlled, so you'd never get an honest answer from it regardless anyways, until there's eventually a time when citizens are able to physically go up and actually see if there's a flat surface, if it continues going, if there's a firmament itself. Because, I mean, there's been a lot of weird experiments where you kind of question if there is some type of like a firmament to begin with. I mean, multiple rocket missions that they have claimed to, or what was that one? They specifically said that they're going to crack the ceiling or something like that with it when they were like launching a missile up or something.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, but I will say this. If it turns out we live on a flat plane, a flat stationary Earth, then there is more land that hasn't been discovered, which would be outside of Antarctica. And then if it turns out that we live on a globe, there's obviously going to be then space that is not fully discovered. So either model is going to leave us with something exciting to pursue and to seek out. And yeah, like you said, hopefully, whether that's traveling out on a flat Earth or in space on a globe, hopefully that will become more reachable and attainable by your average person. And
just out of curiosity, because I always love digging into the Antarctica stuff, it always fascinates me. from your research, have you found any other like weird stories about what might be in Antarctica or ice bridges or any other like reference points?
I haven't researched it too much, but I will say this. There are some pyramid looking things in Antarctica. The pictures I've seen, they look very, very pyramid-esque. And so some people think they're pyramids, some people think they are mountains. And it's like, wow, like it's tough for me to think that it's actually just a mountain because it's just so cut like a pyramid, but it's also partially covered under snow and ice. So I think there's definitely some things to be discovered for sure. It's just such a harsh environment being so cold. And so, yeah, I think some cool discoveries will be made eventually.
Not to sidetrack too much from like what we're actually talking about, but the whole pyramid concept. I don't know if you dive into like the whole like weird history, but I feel like the pyramids, they seem to be placed in these areas where they're just extreme climates. Like people have claimed to have found some in Alaska. People have claimed to have found some in Antarctica. Obviously, there's the ones in Egypt. So I feel like there might be a possibility that these things may have been some form of like terraforming. I mean, maybe it's definitely possible that like temperatures and climates have shifted in specific areas through time. But on the other side too, I've often wondered if these things possibly somewhat terraform an area and make it so they possibly are inhabitable. And that might be potentially why they hide some of these ones that seem to be in these like really obscure regions. And it seems like even again, the ones that you do have access to, you only have access to certain areas. They have like a specific narrative that they talk to as far as like what they think this one was. Like the ones in Egypt. I mean, they've been holding to the fact that they've been saying those things were tombs for years, but they never actually found really anything in that. They found all the pharaohs and everything in the Valley of the Pharaohs, but they never really found anything in the tomb. And back in the day when they were asking people like what the pyramids were, they said that they represent us, and they supposedly didn't know what that means. And I don't know if that's something that's been lost through time, but I definitely have taken into consideration the terraforming idea multiple times. And if you dive into the whole aspect of like Hitler obviously diving into a lot of the occult stuff and having a lot of ties to Antarctica and looking for weird artifacts and whatever, it would completely make sense that he would be investigating in Antarctica because, I mean, if there were supposedly these pyramids and other things there, if it was just exactly what they said it was, and it was just this giant sheet of ice and there wasn't anything there, then why would there have been such this weird interest for all these like secret government organizations and again the occult side of the Nazis going there and trying to find stuff?
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of research into pyramids specifically, but I will say I have a friend, and I could be remembering this wrong. I have a terrible memory, but I think he's told me that they've actually found pyramids underwater as well. So super fascinating.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all from that. I mean, maybe even Atlantis itself might have actually been a place that had pyramids. I mean, definitely a possibility. And if that's the case too, maybe that was what was potentially holding the water back, so to speak, if it was eventually flooded out, was the fact that these things were some form of terraforming and some type of advanced secret technology or ancient technology.
Yeah, it's fun to think about.
Oh yeah, definitely. But diving back into the final experiment stuff. So as far as like where you kind of started off at from the beginning up to the point that you're at now, what's kind of been like your process you've been trying to do? So you've been creating like YouTube videos, I assume step by step, kind of just trying to describe these different ideas and everything that might potentially shift people over. But what ideas have you kind of like shuffled through besides the whole 24-hour sun idea in Antarctica as far as trying to portray your ideas to the general public?
That's really been the main one, and I'll tell you why. I feel like with the other arguments, the two sides are at an impasse. So, for example, the globe side will say because there's sunsets, that proves the globe. The flat Earth side will say, no, we can explain sunsets. The flat Earth side will say, well, we can shoot these lasers over large bodies of water, and that refutes the globe because we shouldn't be able to see that light because we should be, quote unquote, behind the curve. And then the globe side says, well, no, because you guys don't understand how light works and how refraction works. We can keep going. The globe side says that ships disappear over the horizon, and flat earthers say, no, if you get a camera with enough zoom, you can zoom in and see the whole ship. So I feel like these same arguments are just going back and forth, and not really getting anybody anywhere. My goal with the final experiment was to actually move the needle forward in a very significant way, maybe the most significant in the history of this debate, using things that both sides had stated as true about Antarctica, realizing that this experiment itself has not been done, namely taking at least one person from the globe side and one person from the flat Earth side to Antarctica. Fortunately, the final experiment has blown up and taken off, and there will be at least 3 from each side going to Antarctica, 3 flat earthers and 3 globe earthers. So this is going to be, I think, a historic endeavor, and I'm super excited about it.
We will be right back after this brief commercial break. But just a quick reminder, if you guys want to stay up to date on the show, you guys can always go and follow Inquiries of Our Reality and Open Minds Media on Instagram, Facebook, Discord, YouTube, and TikTok. Now feel free to fast forward through these commercials so we can hop right back into the show. And we are back, so let's get back to it. And as far as getting up there, did you guys like get government permission, or like do you have like a specific area or anything like that that you're able to go to? Like, how did you kind of like figure out the other end of that, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, it's great. So I knew nothing about Antarctica. So I just started with a simple Google search. And once the way marketing works today with, I don't even know how it all works, but with cookies and all that, whatever, all that kind of stuff, once you start looking for things, the ads will start to be custom tailored for you. So I started getting ads on Facebook about trips to Antarctica, ads on YouTube about trips to Antarctica. And so I eventually just found there's around a dozen companies or so, maybe less, that take tourists to Antarctica. And so I started looking at the cost of the trips, where they go, and I quickly noticed there were 2 sides, kind of. You could go to Antarctica on a boat, or you could go to Antarctica on a plane. And so the most popular was by boat, the cheapest was by boat, but I realized to do this right, we have to go a little bit further south than you can get by boat. So I found a company that flies people to Antarctica. They're called Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions. They go by ALE for short. They had a reasonable trip because it's very expensive to go to Antarctica. I contacted them and said, hey, here's what I'd like to do. They said, no problem. And that's who we're using.
Are you worried about the fact of like when you come back, whether you find evidence on either side that there might be some type of like interference as far as like the information itself getting back?
I'm not, but a lot of people have mentioned that to me, and so I'm definitely open to it. And I think here's what's cool about the scientific method. The scientific method is about making predictions and then testing them, right? And so I'm taking in all of these predictions being made by both sides. The globe side thinks that the trip is just going to be, smooth and nothing's going to go wrong. A lot of people on the flat Earth side thinks that the trip might be canceled, or there might be some funny business like you're mentioning. And so I'm just taking that data in, and after the fact, we'll see whose predictions were right.
I'm kind of curious if there's going to be like a certain thing where they only let people go to like specific areas, because I wonder if it's like a big enough landmass, if it'd be one of those things where like if you're on the outside edge of it, you are still getting that day and night cycle. But if it's big enough, when you start getting towards the centers, when you might get that 24-hour light cycle possibly. But I don't know, I feel like there might be some weirdness to it depending on how big the landmass itself actually is, because you may think that you're like towards the center of it, but if you have no idea of like where the actual potential center might be, then you might be like way far off than you might actually think you are, and they could potentially keep people in this specific area on purpose.
Yeah, we'll see. We're going to do everything we can to, use GPS trackers and compasses and, filming out the windows of the plane. We're going to do everything we can to just give people as much data and information as possible. And I think that's what everybody's looking for. So there is a common theme on both sides of the debate, which is truth, right? We're both seeking truth. We both have a strong desire to figure out the truth, and that's what this expedition's all about.
So you said that you kind of don't have your mind necessarily set either way at this current time, right? You're kind of leaning more towards the flat Earth, but you're not necessarily set either way, right?
I am leaning more towards the globe side, actually.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, what kind of pushes you a little bit in either direction? Like, what are your pros and cons as far as like globe Earth and as far as like flat Earth goes? Because like I said, for me, I kind of gear more towards the globe Earth idea, but on the other side of it, I definitely see the circular pattern. So I definitely think that there is a possibility that if there is a flat Earth, it's definitely still in that round shape, which is why when you have the whole idea that people say with an eclipse, that it proves that the Earth itself is round, I feel like it may not necessarily do that. It may just prove that there's a circular shape to it. But at least for you, what's kind of like your pros and cons on either side that kind of push you in one direction more than the other?
Yeah. So on the globe side, the the photographs of the Earth from space are convincing to me. Now, I know they're not to the flat Earth side, and I get it. So the flat Earth side will say that those images are CGI, that they're doctored, altered, fake, whatever. And they point to, a guy who worked for NASA named Robert Simon, who actually admitted to photoshopping an image for NASA. And they'll point to things like I mentioned, like anomalies in the pictures, like duplicated clouds and things. And so that's one where I just don't see how one side is going to convince the other. And so I am comfortable with my take on those images, and they're comfortable with their take on those images. And so I just don't see how adding any new images is going to move the needle at all, right? So
you're going to see what you want to see no matter what you're looking at. Like that's how that's going to go down.
Yeah, I'm going to see it, and I'm just going to be like, I'm comfortable with these images. The flat earthers are going to see it, and they're going to be like, we're not comfortable. So again, I spent literally over a year thinking about what could we do that would settle the debate? What could we do that both sides would accept the results of? And what could we do together? And I went through everything, right? Like people are always just like, well, since they don't accept the pictures, then let's go to space together. And I thought about that. And I'm like, if we all got into some sort of a space shuttle together, how would we know where we were going?
Or if you come back.
Yeah. How would we know that the windows were real and what we were looking at out the window? Like there's just always something that I feel like could be an excuse. And so everything just kept taking me to the southern part of the world, whether it's the outside on the flat earth or the southern hemisphere on the globe. And I just kept realizing like this mysterious place, Antarctica, is going to hold the key. And I started hearing flat earthers say Antarctica does hold the key to the truth about our realm. And I was like, let's just get there. Like, what can we do to get there? And who knows where I would have been willing to go. Like, had I found out we couldn't get there, no one would allow us in, the government would not want us to go. Hey, maybe getting on a boat and just trying with a whole bunch of us might have made sense. But fortunately, I was able to find a company that can go. So they clearly have the permissions from the government to go. And it's just a matter of writing a check. And so to me, that was worth it. It's a investment into humanity. If we live on a globe, a lot of people are wasting a lot of time arguing for a flat earth. But if we live on a flat earth, then we're being lied to, and that it deserves to be exposed. So either way, I look at this as a big win.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I definitely gear towards the fact that whether the planet itself is bigger than what we think it is, I definitely think that the Arctic holds some secrets as far as like even potentially another landmass that the whole intention maybe behind it was that it was this reserve landmass that, all the governments kind of like knew was there. And the whole idea is that this is this untainted area that if anything ever went down, everybody has a place to escape to possibly. Or even on the other side, man, there could potentially be this more intelligent race that's potentially living there and kind of pushing everybody away and telling everybody to stay away. And it's a matter of like, you go there and they'll give you some secrets in order to kind of stay away from this area. But it's one of those things that no matter what, I feel like people that go there, either one of two things is going to happen. One, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, you're going to be pushed. Oh, this is the area that we go to. This is the only area you're allowed to. You're in the middle of it. Or on the other side of it, if you started actually being able to see part of this area, then you'd have to sign all of these different affidavits and all this other stuff, basically saying that you can't bring the information back. So it's kind of like you were mentioning with the space. There's like so much tampering that it's almost like hard that you want to go and do an honest experiment, but by the end of it, who knows what may pop up that, there may even be something, or as soon as you actually go onto the continent itself, they make you sign something saying that you can't bring back anything besides stuff that they have approved that they've already gone through. But again, it's hard to tell specifically like what's going to be the piece of information that puts like the nail in the coffin, because even like you mentioned, going to space, the tampering with that too, that no matter what way you look at it, even if like Elon Musk starts doing like passenger flights or able to go to space, the guy has so much advancement in technology that he could just as easily, like you said, make like screen windows that are actually just showing you an image of whatever they want you to be able to see, but it's not actually what you're physically seeing through that window itself. So, I mean, no matter what way you look at it, you're going to space, you're going to the Arctic, there is going to be some form of government intervention and some kind of government tampering in that even with the most honest intentions, who knows what you might actually be able to potentially come back with. And part of the idea, man, is maybe they even partially want you to do the research for them and themselves, so they won't tell you about any of this stuff until you're coming back. And then as soon as you're coming back, they're like, all right, let me see all your pictures. Let me see anything that you've taken. This is what you're allowed to talk about. This is what you're not allowed to talk about. Please sign here. Otherwise, I guess you're going to be living at this base from now on.
Yeah, we'll see. I have no problem being a whistleblower if I need to be. That doesn't bother me. So it's going to be interesting for sure. There's been a lot of ideas thrown out, a lot of predictions of crazy things that could or might happen. And so for me, I'm just taking it all in and willing to go along for the ride and see what happens. So I'm excited for it.
Oh, yeah, man. And you'll have to come back and tell me whatever information you end up getting after you go on that trip. Do you have like a specific day planned or anything already for this? So if anybody wants to come and check out your research, they know when to come back and check everything out?
Yeah, so the plan is we will land in Antarctica on December 14th. So that's 3 months away. So it'll be here very quickly. Now, we don't know what it's going to be like. We don't know if we will have like what our internet access will be like. But if we do have any type of internet, we're going to try to do some live streams from there. And so that'll be exciting for people.
I wonder if you could use like Starlink or something for that. Like you guys might have to look in specifically to Starlink for that.
Yeah, that's what we've been told is that Starlink is available. We just don't understand the limitations of the bandwidth, but that's what we're going to hopefully use.
Hey, hopefully you can at least run one camera with like low definition or something like that. Unless they purposely have some kind of blocker where they don't want you to get information out.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see, but we're going to try.
And then I guess to kind of push it in a little bit of a different direction, but definitely something that I feel still kind of entails into this. As far as like Hollow Earth goes, have you dived into like any of like the Hollow Earth stuff? Do you have like a belief in that or how it could potentially fit into the idea of flat Earth or globe Earth?
I have not looked into it. So people who follow me can know, they know I'm willing to hear new information. And so no one's really presented that to me. People have presented me with alternative models to the traditional globe and the traditional flat Earth model, which I have on the background here. And those are not that exciting to me. So there's been this model where if you get to a certain point on, like they say that the flat Earth is more like a rectangle. And if you get to one side, you teleport to the other side. And that just doesn't excite me that much.
Yeah, that one doesn't seem as logical to me as a lot of other ideas or theories. Like, I would almost kind of like want to believe more of the idea that you fall off the end of it rather than like you just teleport to the other side. But I guess we get into the portal idea. I mean, it's definitely possible. Or even the idea that everything that we're living in is some form of an organic simulation.
Yeah, if someone wants to, present another model to me, I'm all ears. But again, you're going to have to be able to explain it, and I'll ask questions and try to understand it as best I can. But if you can't explain it, it doesn't make sense, then you're not going to have a convert here.
Yeah, true. The only reason I ask is because I feel like it can potentially fit both models. Whether you're looking at it from like a flat Earth model, you're looking at like a thicker crust, and there's definitely an area for things to be able to go underground. Or if you're looking at it from the Earth side, then definitely there's the whole idea that Earth itself is a hollow center, and there's all these caverns that potentially go into this other like area that you could potentially live in. But the other reason I was bringing it up is because there's a lot of people who have theorized there being entrances into this Hollow Earth area from the Antarctic itself, the center of it being like one of the main access points. So I didn't know if you guys had done any research into that or had any curiosity in potentially, trying to investigate some of these potential areas. But every time I've ever looked at the model on Google, like you kind of mentioned in the beginning, it kind of seems like there's some overlapping over the end. And maybe that's a matter of just the way they scan it, that it kind of just overlays itself at a certain point. But if you have this full satellite 3D model, I don't necessarily take that into consideration that it would like overlap itself because you're already like 3D mapping the Earth itself. So either at the center point, the mass is bigger and they make it look like it's shrunk down, or on the other side, there is some type of a whole entrance or possibly just like an area where there's forest and everything, and they just try to cover that up with that weird, awkward circle that's been on Google Maps forever if you look at the very center.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. But before we get into this commercial break, if anybody is interested in supporting the show or any of the work I do over here, you guys can go and check out the OMM Patreon. Over there is 7-day free trials available for all of the tiers, and it is constantly updating with new shows and different stuff going on. You guys can also go and check out the OMM merch store, constantly getting updated with new designs, not just pertaining to the podcast themselves, but also cryptid, paranormal, and extraterrestrial related designs. And the third way you guys can support the show, if you guys think I deserve it, is that you guys can leave a 5-star review or rating for the show on iTunes or Spotify. And if you guys leave a 5-star review, of course, I will read on the show and give you guys a big shout out. Now let's get to the commercial break so we can hop back in the show. And we are back. So let's hop right in.
We're not going to be doing a lot of exploring on our trip. We're going to be really monitoring and documenting the sun. So I don't think we're going to find any type of entrances to a hollow earth. I will say that we're going to be doing our best to avoid crevasses in Antarctica, but hey, maybe if someone falls into a crevasse, maybe that goes into some other new place in the middle of the earth.
Cross my fingers nothing like that actually happens, but I mean, I think the main thing that you potentially have to worry about with those crevices is, like I said, I definitely take in the idea about hollow earth, but I definitely think that there was some type of landmass, or there is some type of landmass under the Arctic, but I kind of wonder if there could potentially be like passages that go down to whatever this landmass is, and even if it's not like luscious forest or anything like that crazy underneath the ice, if there just might potentially be pockets that are like the land itself, and then there's like, you know, maybe even like a 10-foot area of like a crack in the middle of the ice where you just see the land itself, and there could potentially be some like bacterias and different like small living organisms that potentially nobody's ever seen before.
Yeah, I mean, the idea for me personally of finding new creatures is, I love that. I love wildlife and animals, so all that kind of stuff excites me, but the reality is we got to figure out what's really going on and go from there.
Man, I don't know if you dive into the really obscure stuff, but I've heard a bunch of these weird reports of these like spider-like things that are supposedly seen in the Arctic. So, I mean, if there are those little caverns, I mean, maybe that's definitely potentially possible. But I guess with the Arctic, there's just so much mystery behind it that it's like you hear all these weird pieces of information. And, you know, if you live in Kentucky and you hear about some weird things that are all over Kentucky, you know, you can live there and make an assessment of, oh, yeah, these things aren't all over the place. Maybe they're possible in certain areas, but whatever. But when you hear about the Arctic, it's like nobody's been there. So the only pictures that you know or have seen, well, people have been there, but again, that's like government interference coming in and stuff. But, you know, like the average person hasn't necessarily been there. So it's hard to have that like standard of like, this could potentially be something that's there. This could potentially be something that's not there. But when you start diving into like the deep sea, really, really cold areas, it seems like these things almost kind of look like face huggers or something from Alien. Like they have these like really thick exoskeletons and stuff. So assumably if there was something living in the Arctic, either one, it's going to be something with an extremely thick exoskeleton, or it's going to be something that has like hollow hair like a polar bear or something like that is able to keep itself warm. But it seems like it's going to go one way or the other. And it seems like with the Arctic stuff, with a lot of the stuff seen over there, it seems like there's more of like the aquatic base to stuff. So if there was some type of like weird creature living on there, I feel like the exoskeleton idea could possibly make sense.
Yeah, again, both models have this excitement of potentially finding, you know, extraterrestrial life. On the globe model, they're looking in space, and on the flat Earth model, it would be in Antarctica or beyond.
And just out of curiosity, too, you brought up the ice wall a few times. At least for yourself, like what do you kind of feel is like the probability of that? Do you think that that's something that's just like a ridiculous claim, or do you kind of take it as something that might have some validity to it?
If the flat Earth model is true, then there would need to be something to hold the water in, because the flat Earth model denies gravity. And so it actually does make sense to me. So I think if there is no 24-hour sun, the sun rises and sets in Antarctica, then I think it's very likely that Antarctica is an ice wall holding in the water and encompassing all of the other land masses.
And just kind of a weird thing to think about. It seems like if everything fit into this flat Earth model, that a lot of these like occult ideas would have a lot more validity to them, I feel, for a lot of people. So if you talk about the whole occult idea behind, like, they have to show you things that you're aware of them, but they do it in this indirect way. How many references are there to like ice walls? Like, you have like Game of Thrones, for example, that there's the giant ice wall. There's a couple other movies I'm sure that have giant ice walls. So if that is the case, I feel like, again, the idea of the occult would kind of bring in a little bit more to people. And the whole idea behind all these ice walls and everything would have a lot more sense, that they were almost like trying to show you the real world right in front of you without you necessarily knowing that that's what they were trying to show you. Or on the other side, they do this idea where they put it in fiction, they put it in fantasy, so that when people hear about this idea of like an ice wall, it sounds like something that's from like a fantasy movie instead of something that's legitimate. So it's almost to deter people away from the idea of that being something logical and more towards something that's in the fantasy realm.
Yeah, I actually have never seen Game of Thrones, so I'm not familiar with that, but it's an interesting idea.
Man, in that show, fantastic for anybody that's into medieval time type shows. Basically, the whole idea is that they go far enough north, and there's this giant ice wall that they guard. And on the other side of it is this other like land area where there's like the ice walkers, and there's like all these other groups and tribes that they're not fully aware of. So if you really break it down, it's literally the idea that people claim as far as like the flat Earth model. And it seems like that may have purposely been brought into the forefront, because I feel like around the time Game of Thrones was starting to become really popular was around the time when, you know, people were really diving into this whole like flat Earth concept. So again, maybe it's intended to kind of deter people, or they associate it with this fantasy thing. Or on the other side, maybe the guy writing it, regardless of like what he says in interviews and stuff, maybe he's aware of some stuff he's not supposed to be aware of. So a lot of these people, I feel, that are aware of things will hide it within their stories and just kind of say that it's fiction, but almost rather than deterring people, kind of give people a standard of comparison to say like, oh, I saw something like that, it reminded me of this. So it kind of gives people like a base idea for it. But I don't know, I feel like it fits that model pretty well as far as like the landmass of there being more of these tribes and everything else that people aren't aware of farther past the ice wall in the north.
Yeah, the a movie I like is Inception. You remember that one?
Oh yeah, Inception's fantastic.
I like the idea, the hypothetical idea of being able to plant an idea in someone's mind, and so it's fun to think about.
I mean, if you're going by that model too, man, I mean, it kind of gets into the whole like simulation idea too, that basically like they can manipulate the world into being whatever you want it to be, because if it is theoretically an organic simulation, they can just put these little like tricks in front of you that'll make it so that you kind of view the Earth from like this model yourself. Kind of like we were talking about a little bit earlier with the pictures, that you're going to look for what you want to see. And if there is potentially some manipulation that's able to be done to this reality, then you can kind of like lay these pieces down where they can be kind of viewed both ways. Going back into like kind of mind-bending movies, like you brought up Inception, like Shutter Island, it's one of those things that it's like you can look at that movie the whole time like the guy's crazy or like he's completely sane, but they purposely place these clues down so they can go in either direction, so that no matter which way you pick, you still feel like you're right, but for the same reason you're right, you're wrong to the other side.
Yeah, I haven't seen that movie in a very long time. I don't remember it.
Man, it was fantastic, but not to get too far into movies or anything like that, but getting into like the whole manipulation idea, though, that they basically will like put these obvious things in front of you that split. I mean, the whole flat Earth, globe Earth debate, I feel, is one of those things that no matter which side that you want to be on with it, they've intentionally kind of placed this thing here so that people will argue from both sides with each other instead of actually looking at the people that hold this information. So like we brought up a little bit earlier with NASA, it's like they throw this idea out so that these two sides will argue with each other so that they can keep working in the shadows. But one day maybe flat Earth, globe Earth will both realize that the people who are the gatekeepers to this information are NASA itself. And we had the whole like raid Area 51 idea a couple of years ago. We got to do something where we like raid the NASA laboratories or something, and then maybe we'll get a little bit of information from both sides.
Did they raid Area 51? I didn't hear that.
I don't know if they actually legitimately did, but I know that people had like a party like outside, like in the desert. But I don't think anybody actually legitimately like rushed this base or anything like that. But I think it's one of those things that it's like, it's a good idea until everybody's standing there and then they realize that it's a military base and there's a bunch of guys standing there pointing rifles at you. And then they're like, all right, maybe we'll just hang out back here and talk about aliens and not try to do that.
Yeah, Area 51 is an interesting one for me. I thought about it a lot as a child. So,
See, I think it's one of those places that it's intended to deter the information away, which could potentially be the same thing with NASA. That everybody would assumably go to Florida to try to like raid NASA, but they may actually have a lot of these deeper research bases totally hidden in different areas. And I mean, as far as like Area 51 goes, it's like I feel like if that much of a focal point is put on that one place, there can't be anything there anymore. And there's been a bunch of whistleblowers who have claimed that all the hidden stuff is within the mountains and everything around it. So assumably kind of the same thing, that if you're going to try to raid NASA, it's not going to be at the NASA offices themselves. It's probably going to be on some satellite location, or they've created some kind of tunnels or something underneath it.
yeah, that makes sense. There is something called NORAD in Colorado, which is some sort of like a shelter that was built inside of a mountain. And that's actually pretty cool because everybody knows where it is. I know where it is. You can see the antennas and towers on top of it, but they built it in the middle of a mountain so that even though people know where it is, if like another country wanted to send some sort of a nuclear weapon or something to it, I think it would still protect what's inside. So it's interesting.
I mean, Bob Lazar, that was his whole thing that he talked about, was basically these giant hatches that would open up in the mountains and everything too. So, I mean, there's obviously the one that they're making you look at, but I think that there's potentially a lot more of these bases hidden around. And bring it back into the Arctic conversation. Maybe there's potentially more bases hidden in the Arctic than we think they are, and they're hidden in some of these mountainous areas, which are why they kind of deter you away from them.
Yeah, maybe it's it's super cold there, so it makes things tough. But it's anything's possible, I guess.
And kind of diving back into your stuff before we run out of time too, as far as like when you actually go to the Arctic and you record all this stuff, you make it live and everything, are you planning on turning the actual trip itself into like a documentary or something, so it's its own solid piece of information?
No plans for that yet, but who knows what'll happen in the future. I'm I'm pretty burnt out, honestly. It's this has taken way more of my time than I thought it would, and so we're just gonna have to see. But no plans for that currently.
And then just out of curiosity too, obviously you've been working on all of this stuff as far as being like a content creator. Do you have any other things that you wanted to dive into after this one, or are you going to kind of close the doors and call it quits as far as like creating content?
Yeah, I just don't know. I'm gonna have to take a break. That's for sure. I have a ton of big ideas, but none of them are in this space yet. They're in other spaces, and so my problem is I get involved in these big projects, and they always get bigger than I anticipate, and they take up too much of my time. And my wife and kids are not too appreciative of that.
I can definitely relate with running two shows and doing everything with the podcast and everything. But I always like to kind of dive in a little bit into like what makes people tick. So other than like the flat earth stuff, if you had like one specific thing that you'd think of diving into possibly afterwards, do you have an idea of what that thing might be?
That's a really good question. I'm not good thinking on the fly, so I just don't know. I do like history. I really like history. As a kid, I didn't understand the purpose of history, but now I feel like it's so important. It's where we came from, understanding what actually happened in the past, where things happened, why they happened, when they happened is interesting to me. I like archaeology. There is so much to be unearthed archaeologically. Archaeology is very slow. It's very expensive. You need to raise money, and just not that, I feel like not that many people are interested in it. So maybe something along those lines, but tough to say right now.
Inquiries of All Reality will be back after this brief commercial break, but just a quick reminder, don't forget to go and check out the awesome sponsors of the show: IKNOWSQUATCH, Cryptoteeology, Snarly Natural Products, Oregon-ite, Dimension Devices, and Big Ape Threads. More information and discounts for those are all available down in the show description. Now feel free to fast forward through these commercials so we can hop right back into the show. And we are back, so let's get back to it. See, it's one of those things too that if you find a major discovery as far as archaeology goes, if it's something that doesn't fit into the paradigm, then they're going to do everything they can to cover it up. So it's like, even if you find something that's just mind-bending, more often than not, you're not going to hear about it. Because if it changes the paradigm of how reality or history is, then they're like, oh yeah, just push that off to the side. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, another reason more of us should get into it to try to prevent that from happening.
Hey man, it almost kind of feels like the next thing you might potentially dive into is possibly the mudslide theory, because that seems to be one of those things that people debate just as much as the flat earth, globe earth concept. So if you could bring some validity and kind of combine the archaeology and history concept with possibly disproving or proving the mudslides, I mean, that could definitely be something that's fascinating and worth diving into, because I feel like that's one of those things that could potentially completely modify history as far as like where potentially it could have came from. Because I mean, it could have been something that happened right after like the flood event would have happened, where maybe there was like this continuation of the water pushing down and creating these mudslides in like the lower hemisphere of the earth. If this impact site may have potentially been up in North America somewhere. But I mean, if that's the case, then the Great Flood is a lot closer to our current date than what we think it is. And again, that could completely shatter the paradigm of time itself if you started diving into the mudslide thing and trying to go back and connect it into some of these other fields of research that people are doing.
Yeah, not too familiar, but I'm open. I'm open.
And starting to wrap up towards the end, man, I always like to do words of wisdom. So if there was any words of wisdom you could bestow on the listeners, what might it be?
Yeah, so I think it's important that we check ourselves and we really examine ourselves to see if we are searching for truth or if we are searching for something to validate what we believe. There's a huge difference there. And I think it's super easy to get caught up. I think we all do. I have for sure get caught up in just trying to make things fit into what we want them to say or do or be, and to look for things that would help us and disregard things that wouldn't. And so I think like kind of everybody just needs to like kind of take a deep breath, step back and say, hey, am I really looking for truth? What can I do to try to be as objective and unbiased as possible? And that's one of the things I've been trying to do with the final experiment is be objective, bring both sides together, make sure both sides hold each other accountable, and just say, hey, let the results be the results. And yeah, so that's what I'd say for people to do. And I think it'll make the world a better place.
See, that's one of those things that it's like such a good idea in practice, but it's like so hard to do, because as soon as you start diving into some research onto something, it's like just as a human, you unintentionally end up becoming biased towards one side, unfortunately. So it's like, obviously that is going to absolutely be the best way to do the research. And it's one of those things that like everybody says, oh yeah, obviously you want to have an unbiased idea when it comes to research, but it's one of those things that I feel like it needs to be drilled into people's heads, because it's a lot harder to do than what people actually think it is. Because as a human, try not to gear towards one side as soon as you start getting information. Your brain naturally wants to select a side. So it's like, you definitely have to even yourself out with having enough people that are on the opposite sides of like 3 and 3 or something like that. But as soon as opinions start shifting, it's like hard to keep that perfectly balanced idea in order to do the research, because there's always going to be that human sway as you start getting more information. But I guess that's just growth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got to be open to changing our minds. We need to be open to being wrong, and we need to have that openness in order to see things for the reality of what they are.
I've always heard the expression, I love it, that one of the signs of intelligence is being able to change your mind with more information. So hopefully that's definitely the case with a lot of this flat earth, globe earth stuff. It seems like it's starting to be one of those things that was something where people were going really, really hard about for a while. And it seems like it's one of those things that people are starting to kind of relax a little bit on each other about, and both sides are starting to argue. And we're finally getting to this point where everybody just wants the truth and the information. And rather than fighting each other, they're actually starting to come to these awesome center points where both sides, like what you guys are doing, are able to actually come together to try to get to a piece of this information, rather than just being put in the same room and just screaming at each other.
Absolutely. Yep. I couldn't agree more. So.
And then if anybody wanted to come and check out your research, they wanted to check out any of the information that you guys are going to be putting out in December, where can people come and find you on the internet? Where can people possibly contact you? And then even on the other side, I forgot to ask a little bit earlier, I don't know if you guys were intending on crowdfunding for any of this stuff, but if you guys are still crowdfunding and people wanted to potentially fund it, where might they be able to go and check that out too?
Yeah, so the best place for updates is to find us on YouTube. If you YouTube search The Final Experiment, we come right up. Our logo is, says TFE. We give really, multiple updates a week at this point. There's a lot going on. Our website has a lot of great information. Again, it's thefinalexperiment.com with dashes, the-final-experiment.com. We've got FAQs on there. There's a contact us button if you want to reach us. There's also a list of people crowdfunding. And so you can learn about them and and support them if you want, because these are people who want to go. Anybody can go with us too. It's not closed. So there's people that have funded themselves. There's people who have sponsored others, and there are people who are crowdfunding. So all of that is on our website. And if we happen to have missed something on there and you have a question, there's a contact us button, no problem.
Well, man, I feel like you're doing awesome research for both sides, so my hat's off to you as far as the way that you're going about this research, because when we first started the conversation, obviously everybody assumes that you kind of geared more towards one side, but I like the fact that you're kind of objectively in the middle and bringing everybody together to this. So props to you for the way you're going about your research and actually bringing some light to the situation rather than just causing more arguing within people in both sides of the community. So I'm really looking forward to where everything goes, and I'm looking forward to figuring out what information you guys end up digging up.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
If anyone would like to get in touch with me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can email me at inquiriesofoutrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of me on social media, Instagram or Facebook. Instagram is the one that I'm the most active on, of course. Or you guys can get a hold of me through the submission forums, which are available on the link tree. One of which is to contact me, and the other one is to report an encounter. So make sure you guys don't forget to report those encounters while you're at it. And every single thing that I mentioned throughout the show is all available in the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. I hope today's show has connected some dots for you in your own reality, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey, with a mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality.